wasn't looking for giants when I started this investigation. I was researching something far more mundane, the early administrative history of the Smithsonian Institution, acquisition records, shipping manifests, the kind of paperwork that puts most people to sleep. It started with the Bureau of Ethnology. Founded in 1879, it was America's first serious attempt to catalogue the archaeological heritage of a young nation. Thousands of specimens flowed into Washington from excavations across the country: pottery, tools, textiles, human remains. I was reading through their annual reports, digitized now, available to anyone with patience and an internet connection, when I noticed something strange. Report after report described the same thing: giant human skeletons, 7 feet, 8 feet, some claimed 9 feet or more, discovered in mounds from Ohio to California, and every report ended the same way: specimens forwarded to the Smithsonian for examination and preservation. So I did what any researcher would do. I cross-referenced. I pulled the Smithsonian's current collection database. I searched for oversized human skeletal remains. I searched for giant. I searched for the specific site names mentioned in those 19th century reports. Nothing. Not a single specimen matching those descriptions appears in the modern catalogue. This raises a simple but critical question: where did they go? That's when I found the 1894 Consolidation Memo, a routine administrative document describing the reorganization of storage facilities. Most of it was unremarkable: which crates moved where, which buildings were being repurposed. But one line stopped me cold. Building 26, consolidation of oversized human skeletal specimens, approximately 1,000 items, restricted access pending review. Over 1,000 specimens, restricted access. I searched for follow-up documentation, a review completion notice, a catalogue update, anything indicating what happened next. There was nothing. The paper trail simply ends. And that's when the official explanations began to collapse. The bones came from everywhere. Once I started looking, I found them in newspaper archives from nearly every state in the Union. And not tabloids, not fringe publications. The New York Times, the Washington Post, Scientific American, respected outlets reporting what their reporters saw with their own eyes. Let me walk you through just a few of them. Sauk County, Wisconsin, 1891. A team excavating a group of ancient mounds uncovered 18 skeletons. The New York Times reported the discovery on May 4th of that year. The smallest skeleton measured 7 feet 6 inches. The largest exceeded 10 feet. The skulls were described as enormous, with double rows of teeth. The article noted that the specimens would be sent to the Smithsonian Institution for study. I searched the Smithsonian's records for those 18 skeletons. They are not there. Lovelock Cave, Nevada. 1911 through 1912. A guano mining operation broke through into an ancient burial chamber. What they found inside would be excavated over the following years by the University of California. Red-haired giants, some measuring over 8 feet in length. Mummified remains preserved by the dry desert air. The Smithsonian was consulted on the findings. Key specimens were transferred to institutional custody. Today, the most significant remains have vanished. What's left are fragments. The giants themselves are gone. Catalina Island, California. 1913. An amateur archaeologist named Ralph Glidden began excavating burial sites on the island. Over the next 15 years, he would uncover more than 800 sets of human remains. Among them, skeletons measuring 7 feet, 8 feet, some reportedly approaching 9 feet in length. Glidden offered his collection to the Smithsonian. They expressed interest. Correspondence was exchanged, and then silence. The collection was eventually acquired. Its current whereabouts are listed as unknown, the mounds of West Virginia. Throughout the 1880s, the Bureau of Ethnology conducted extensive excavations across the Ohio Valley. Their own annual reports document the discovery of multiple skeletons exceeding 7 feet in height, unusual skull formations, massive bone density. These weren't second-hand accounts. These were official government reports written by trained field researchers. The specimens were crated and shipped to Washington. The shipping records exist. The arrival confirmations do not. I began mapping these discoveries: Wisconsin, Nevada, California, West Virginia, Ohio, Minnesota, Arizona, Tennessee, New York, Iowa, every region of the country, different excavators, different decades, different circumstances. But the pattern was identical. Local discovery, newspaper coverage with specific measurements, Smithsonian expresses interest, specimens shipped to Washington, initial acknowledgement, and then nothing. Decades later, researchers request access and receive the same response. No specimens matching that description are currently catalogued. The bones went in, they never came out. Between 1880 and 1920, the Smithsonian documented receiving over 1,000 oversized human skeletal remains. Their own annual reports confirm the acquisitions. The shipping manifests exist. The newspaper accounts exist. The internal correspondence exists. But the bones themselves have disappeared, and no one at the institution can explain where they went. Let me show you what this looks like when you map it out. Ohio, 1870s through 1890s. The great mound complexes of the Ohio Valley yielded skeleton after skeleton, measuring well over 7 feet. The Smithsonian's own Cyrus Thomas led many of these excavations. Minnesota, 1888. Construction workers near Lake Coronis unearthed burial mounds containing skeletal remains, described as gigantic in stature. Sent to Washington. Wisconsin, 1891 and again in 1897. Multiple discoveries across the state. Giant bones, double rows of teeth, specimens collected, specimens shipped. California, 1913 and 1923. Catalina Island, the Santa Barbara Channel Islands. Reports of oversized remains spanning a full decade. Nevada, 1911. The Lovelock Cave Giants. Red hair, enormous frames. Arizona, 1891. A buried city near Phoenix. Giant remains found alongside artifacts that didn't match any known native culture. West Virginia, 1884. Government-funded excavations, detailed measurements. 7 and 8 foot skeletons documented in official Bureau of Ethnology reports. Tennessee, 1821. Early accounts of stone coffins containing giants discovered in White County. This predates the Smithsonian, but later researchers would note these reports and wonder why no specimens survived. New York, 1886. Giant skeletons uncovered near Ellisburg. Local papers documented the find. The trail ends at the Smithsonian's front door. Iowa, 1897. Mound excavations revealing oversized remains. Same pattern, same destination, same disappearance. I could continue. I could list 50 more, 100 more. The newspaper archives are filled with these accounts. But here's what disturbs me. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. Every discovery follows an identical sequence. First, there's the local find, workers digging a foundation. Farmers ploughing a field, amateur archaeologists exploring a mound. They uncover something extraordinary. Second, newspapers report it, and these aren't vague accounts. They include measurements: 7 feet 4 inches, 8 feet 2 inches, 9 feet 6 inches. They describe the skeletal structure, the skull size, the jaw formation, the burial position. Third, the Smithsonian expresses interest, sometimes through the Bureau of Ethnology, sometimes through direct correspondence. They want the specimens. They offer to study them. They promise preservation. Fourth, the specimens are shipped, crated and sent by rail to Washington D.C. Shipping manifests are signed. The bones leave their place of discovery and enter the custody of America's most prestigious scientific institution. Fifth, there's an acknowledgment, a letter confirming receipt, a note in an annual report, evidence that the specimens arrived. And sixth, silence. Complete and total silence. No study published, no display mounted, no catalogue entry created. The bones enter the Smithsonian and vanish from the historical record. How did discoveries separated by thousands of miles, reported by different newspapers, excavated by unconnected researchers, all end up at the same institution? And how did they all disappear from that same institution? If this were one case, you might call it an accident, a clerical error, a misfiled box in a forgotten warehouse. But this isn't one case. This is hundreds of cases, perhaps over 1,000, exposed by different people, in different states, across 5 decades, all following the same path, all meeting the same fate. Coincidence doesn't explain this. Incompetence doesn't explain this. Something else does. When you start asking questions about the missing giants, you encounter the same explanations over and over again. I've heard them all, and I've watched each one collapse under the weight of the evidence. The first explanation is the simplest. They never existed. The giant skeleton reports were hoaxes, misidentifications, tall tales from an era before professional archaeology. Newspapers exaggerated, farmers lied, scientists were fooled. It sounds reasonable until you examine who was doing the reporting. These weren't carnival showmen. The Bureau of Ethnology was a federal scientific agency. Their field researchers were trained professionals. They measured bones with calipers. They documented burial contexts. They photographed excavation sites. They wrote detailed reports that were reviewed, edited, and published in official government documents. You cannot claim these specimens never existed while simultaneously holding shipping records that show they were sent to Washington. You cannot dismiss the discoveries as hoaxes while reading the Smithsonian's own acknowledgments of receipt. The institution accepted these bones, they logged them, they stored them somewhere. Hoaxes don't generate 40 years of consistent federal paperwork. The second explanation is related. These were misidentified animal bones. Early archaeologists, the argument goes, lacked the expertise to distinguish human remains from bare skeletons or mammoth fossils. What they thought were giants were simply large animals. This explanation requires us to believe that trained anatomists could not tell the difference between a human femur and a bear femur. That scientists who spent their careers studying skeletal remains could not recognize a human skull. That detailed descriptions of burial positions, grave goods, and skeletal articulation were all somehow confused with animal dens. The Bureau of Ethnology reports are specific. They describe human skeletal structures. They note the position of arms crossed over chests. They catalogue the artifacts buried alongside the remains: pottery, weapons, jewellery. These are human burial practices. Animals do not bury their dead with copper bracelets. The third explanation shifts blame to record keeping. The 19th century was chaotic. Institutions were young. Things got lost. The Smithsonian moved buildings multiple times. Warehouses flooded. Fires destroyed archives. The giant skeletons simply fell through the cracks. This explanation has a problem. The Smithsonian has meticulous records of pottery fragments from this same period. Arrowheads collected in 1885 can be traced through the system. Textile samples from 1890 have complete documentation chains. The institution prides itself on preservation. That is its entire purpose. Only the giant skeletons are unlocatable. Only this category of specimen has vanished so completely that no trace remains. If record-keeping failures explain the disappearance, why did those failures affect only one type of artifact? Why are the giants missing while the arrowheads survived? The fourth explanation is more recent. The Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act of 1990 required institutions to return human remains to tribal nations. Perhaps the giant skeletons were repatriated. Perhaps they went home. This sounds plausible until you examine NAGPRA's requirements. The law mandates detailed documentation of every repatriated item. Institutions must record what they returned, to whom, and when. These records are public. I searched the NAGPRA databases. There are no entries for giant skeletal remains, no 7-foot skeletons, no 8-foot skeletons, no oversized human specimens of any kind. And here's the deeper problem. Researchers were reporting the skeletons missing long before 1990. The giants had already vanished by the mid-20th century. NAGPRA cannot explain a disappearance that happened 50 years before the law existed. So where does that leave us? The giants never existed except the Smithsonian accepted delivery of them. They were animal bones except trained anatomists documented them as human. The records were lost except only for this specific category. They were repatriated except there's no repatriation documentation, and they vanished decades too early. The official answer isn't an answer, it's a series of contradictions held together by institutional authority. We're expected to accept it because the Smithsonian says so, because questioning the narrative means questioning the experts. But the evidence doesn't support the experts. The evidence supports something else entirely. To understand why the giants disappeared, you have to understand who controlled American archaeology at the moment of their discovery. One name dominates this story: John Wesley Powell. Powell was a Civil War veteran who lost his right arm at the Battle of Shiloh. After the war, he became an explorer, leading the first documented expedition through the Grand Canyon. He was fearless, ambitious, and he had a vision for what American science should become. In 1879, Powell was appointed the first director of the Bureau of Ethnology. 2 years later, he also became director of the United States Geological Survey. He held both positions simultaneously for over a decade. No single person had ever wielded so much control over American scientific institutions. Powell had a mission. He wanted to professionalize archaeology, to separate legitimate science from amateur speculation, to establish a single authoritative narrative about America's prehistoric past. And that narrative had no room for giants. Powell believed in a specific timeline. Native American cultures developed gradually over thousands of years. There were no lost civilizations, no forgotten races, no anomalies that couldn't be explained by slow, natural progress. Anything that contradicted this framework was dismissed as fraud, ignorance, or fantasy. Under Powell's leadership, the Bureau of Ethnology became the gatekeeper of acceptable history. His researchers controlled which discoveries were legitimate and which were not. His publications shaped what Americans believed about their own past. His institution decided what evidence would be preserved and what evidence would be forgotten. And that's where the giants become impossible to ignore. Giant skeletons didn't fit Powell's narrative. They suggested something else had existed before the accepted cultures, something larger, something unexplained. Every giant unearthed from an American mound was a direct challenge to the framework Powell had spent his career constructing. So what do you do with evidence that contradicts your entire worldview? You collect it, you control it, and you make sure no one else can study it. The 1894 consolidation happened near the end of Powell's reign. After 15 years of giant skeleton discoveries flowing into Washington, a decision was made to reorganize storage facilities. Building 26, approximately 1,000 oversized human skeletal specimens, restricted access pending review. Powell died in 1902, but the system he created outlived him. His successor at the Smithsonian was a physical anthropologist named Alish Hrdlicka. If Powell was the architect of the cover-up, Hrdlicka was its enforcer. Hrdlicka arrived at the Smithsonian in 1903 and remained for nearly 4 decades. He made his reputation debunking anomalies. Giant skeletons were hoaxes, unusual skull formations were deformities. Any evidence that challenged mainstream archaeology was attacked, ridiculed and dismissed. Under Hrdlicka's watch, the reports of giant discoveries slowed to a trickle and then stopped entirely. Think about that timeline. Before 1900, newspapers across America regularly reported giant skeleton discoveries, detailed measurements, multiple witnesses, physical evidence shipped to Washington. After 1900, the reports become shorter, vaguer, less frequent. By 1920, they've almost completely disappeared. The giants didn't stop being discovered, they stopped being reported. Because by then, everyone understood the rules. Report a giant skeleton, and your professional reputation would be destroyed. The Smithsonian would label you a fraud. Your career would end. The message was clear. Some discoveries were not welcome. This wasn't a conspiracy in the dramatic sense. There were no secret meetings, no signed orders to hide the truth. It was something more subtle and more effective. It was institutional control, the power to define what counts as evidence, the authority to decide which facts are facts and which facts are fantasies. The giants challenged the established order, so the established order erased them, not with fire, not with destruction, just with silence, with restricted access, with catalogue entries that were never created, with questions that were never answered. The most disturbing cover-ups don't require villains. They only require institutions that care more about their authority than about the truth. Let me tell you about Building 26. I've spent months trying to find out what happened to that warehouse. The 1894 memo references it clearly. Consolidation of oversized human skeletal specimens, approximately 1,000 items. Restricted access pending review. That review was never completed. Or if it was, no record of its completion exists. Building 26 was located on the National Mall, part of the original Smithsonian storage complex. It housed materials that didn't fit in the main exhibition halls, overflow collections, duplicate specimens, items awaiting classification, and apparently 1,000 giant skeletons. I filed a Freedom of Information Act request. I asked for any records related to Building 26, its contents, and the 1894 consolidation of oversized human skeletal remains. The response arrived 6 weeks later. No records found matching your description. I filed again. This time I requested the 1894 storage reorganization memos directly. I cited the specific document I had already found in the digitized archives. I provided the date, the reference number, the exact wording. The response was identical. No records found matching your description. The document exists. I've seen it. But according to the Smithsonian, it doesn't exist. I'm not the first person to encounter this wall. Vine Deloria Jr. was a Native American scholar, a professor of law and political science, and one of the most respected indigenous intellectuals of the 20th century. His book Red Earth, White Lies examined the conflict between Native American oral traditions and mainstream scientific narratives. Deloria spent years investigating the giant skeleton reports. He wrote letters to the Smithsonian. He requested access to collections. He asked simple questions. Where are the specimens documented in your own annual reports? Can I examine the bones described in your own publications? The responses he received were masterpieces of bureaucratic obstruction. His requests were transferred between departments. He was told the materials were being reorganized. He was informed that the specific items he sought could not be located at this time. At this time, as if they might be located later, as if someone was looking. No one was looking. Deloria documented every letter, every response, every excuse. His conclusion was unambiguous. The Smithsonian was actively suppressing access to evidence that contradicted its preferred narrative of American prehistory. He published his findings, he named names, he provided dates and reference numbers. Nothing changed. The silence was deafening, and the pattern extends beyond the Smithsonian's walls. I started examining what happened at the discovery sites themselves, the mounds of Wisconsin, the caves of Nevada, the islands of California. In case after case, I found the same sequence: excavation, discovery, documentation, removal, and then something else. Something that happened after the specimens left. The sites were reburied, not preserved, not protected for future study, filled in, covered over, returned to Earth. The Lovelock Cave artifacts that weren't taken to museums were left in the cave when mining operations resumed, buried under fresh guano extraction. The mound sites of the Ohio Valley were leveled for farmland. The Catalina Island excavations were backfilled and forgotten. The physical evidence was removed to Washington, and then the locations themselves were erased from the landscape. Photographs tell part of the story. I found dozens of images from the 19th century excavations. They show dig sites, workers with shovels, open trenches revealing burial chambers, but almost none of them show the actual specimens. The photographs document everything except the giants themselves. Wide shots of excavations, but no close-ups of the bones. Group photos of research teams, but no images of the skeletons they discovered. The shipping manifests tell another part. Crate after crate documented leaving excavation sites. Weights recorded, destinations confirmed. Every box tracked from discovery to departure. But the arrival confirmations are missing. The manifests show bones leaving. Nothing shows them arriving. The paper trail ends at the Smithsonian's door, and then there are the annual reports themselves. In the 1880s, the Bureau of Ethnology publications contained detailed descriptions of giant discoveries, measurements, burial contexts, observations about skeletal anomalies. By the 1890s, those descriptions become shorter, more vague. The word giant appears less frequently. The measurements become rounded estimates rather than precise figures. By 1900, the giant discoveries have almost vanished from official publications. Not because they stopped happening, because they stopped being recorded. Reports became shorter, descriptions became vague. Photographs stopped showing the widest views. The most significant specimens were the ones documented least thoroughly. The most anomalous discoveries received the least attention. This isn't how science works. When researchers find something extraordinary, they document it obsessively. They photograph it from every angle. They measure it repeatedly. They publish detailed analyses, unless they've been told not to. What I'm describing is an active suppression in the traditional sense. No one burned the evidence. No one issued orders to destroy the bones. The skeletons probably still exist somewhere, in a basement, in a warehouse, in a restricted collection that appears on no public catalogue. This is passive erasure, the slow, deliberate process of making evidence inaccessible, of transferring it between departments until the paper trail breaks, of responding to every inquiry with delays and deferrals until the inquirer gives up. The giants weren't destroyed, they were simply made to disappear, and they've stayed disappeared for over a century. So where does this leave us? I started this investigation looking for administrative records. I found 1,000 missing skeletons. I have newspaper accounts from the New York Times describing giants unearthed in Wisconsin. I have Bureau of Ethnology reports documenting oversized remains shipped to Washington. I have shipping manifests showing crates leaving excavation sites. I have a consolidation memo referencing Building 26 and restricted access. What I don't have are the bones. What I don't have is a single satisfactory explanation for where they went. The Smithsonian received these specimens. Their own records confirm it. Their own publications describe them. Their own correspondence acknowledges them. And then they vanished. Not one skeleton, not a dozen. Over 1,000 documented specimens, exposed across 40 years, from every region of the country, all funneling into the same institution, all disappearing into the same silence. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The pattern of discovery, the pattern of acquisition, the pattern of disappearance, the institutional control, the professional gatekeeping, the passive erasure that leaves no fingerprints but achieves total suppression. I'm left with questions I cannot answer. What happened to the 1,000 giant skeletons the Smithsonian documented receiving between 1880 and 1920? Why does Building 26 remain a dead end? Its contents unaccounted for after more than a century? Why did giant skeleton discoveries stop being reported at the precise moment archaeology became a controlled profession? If these specimens were hoaxes, why did the Smithsonian acquire them? If they were legitimate, why did the Smithsonian hide them? What other categories of evidence have been quietly removed from the historical record? What other anomalies have been filed away in restricted collections, written out of catalogues, erased through decades of institutional silence? What else are they hiding in plain sight? We trust institutions to preserve our history. We fund them with public money. We defer to their expertise. We accept their narratives because we believe they have access to evidence we don't. But what if some institutions exist not to preserve history, but to control it? What if their purpose isn't to reveal the past, but to decide which past we're allowed to know? The giants were found, exposed by farmers and construction workers and amateur archaeologists who didn't know they were supposed to stay hidden, documented by newspapers that didn't know certain stories weren't meant to be told, shipped to Washington by researchers who believed they were contributing to human knowledge, and then they were erased. Not with fire, not with conspiracy, just with silence, with restricted access, with FOIA responses that claim no records exist for documents you've already seen. The bones are still somewhere, in a basement, in a warehouse, behind a door that doesn't appear on any public floor plan. 1,000 skeletons don't simply cease to exist, but as long as no one can access them, they might as well not exist at all. I don't have all the answers. No one outside the institution does, but I know where the bones were sent. I know the paper trail that proves they arrived, and I know that trail ends in darkness. What else lies beneath American soil that we've been taught to forget? What else is locked in warehouses we're not allowed to enter? What else have we been told to stop asking about? The giants were real enough to document, real enough to ship, real enough to hide. And until someone opens Building 26, they'll remain exactly what the Smithsonian wants them to be. A question no one is allowed to answer. What do you think? I want to hear from you. If you've come across documentation I haven't covered, old newspaper clippings, family stories, photographs from excavations, share them in the comments. And if this investigation raised questions you'd never considered before, let me know, because this isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning of asking the right questions.